Hi, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
Heads, brains, skin and bones, body parts from the Harvard morgue on sale on the internet. Wait, what? When people donate their bodies to science, people are expecting it to go towards the betterment of medical improvements. But is it really true that people took bodies from Harvard Medical School and sold those body parts in New Hampshire?
What a crazy story this is. It's been all over the news. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper into it than the headlines because the story is even more bizarre than the news media, had time for in their headlines. But it is crazy, isn't it?
I, I was doing a little bit of research into it, and I've definitely seen like Instagrams where people like post like scary, spooky stuff and have like scary aesthetics. But to hear that people were taking skin to make leather out of that and showing off pictures of real human bones, that is bizarre.
So our story starts in the little town of Goffstown, New Hampshire. It's right outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. It's a little town. Our crack camera crew was just there a couple of weeks ago for the episode that we did on the 10 worst intersections in New Hampshire. And we talked to people. They seemed like normal people. They were out on a Saturday, going to the supermarket, riding their bicycles. Goffstown is just a normal little town right outside of Manchester, New Hampshire, as I said. And I think political people will know it because that's where St. Anselm's College is. And anybody that watches the news shows knows that with the New Hampshire primary being in the political view, St. Anselm's has all the political science professors and pollsters that all the big networks that you watch, all the big three-letter networks, go to Goffstown when there's nothing happening that particular day in the news. They go to Goffstown to talk to these professors about, well, how is this candidate doing? How is that candidate doing? And Goffstown is also a little town where they have some bars and taverns where musicians go and, you can see live music. And also on a Sunday, they have a brunch and they have a feature where people can just go on stage if they know how to play, unlike me. But so in Goffstown, one of the residents was a guy who worked at Harvard University. And not only at Harvard University, but at the medical school. Veritas stands for the truth, and that's the saying at Harvard. And so our story starts there with a gentleman who I don't know why I'm calling him a gentleman, a man who worked at Harvard Medical School in Boston as the manager of the morgue. That was his job, and he commuted back and forth from Goffstown to Boston every day. And you know how people that have office jobs, sometimes they're known to pilfer things like a paper or pencil or things like that. This guy was bringing home body parts from the morgue in Harvard to his home in Goffstown, and then he was selling them. Is that crazy?
It's so I have in the past gotten like butt heads with people about not like contributing their bodies to science, like, when you do your license and stuff like that. But, situations like this, all right, I get it. Like, there's, you would think that, especially out of a school, especially with it being Harvard, that there this wouldn't be happening, but it's scary to think that if this is happening at Harvard, where else? Like, what other medical schools? Like, how common is this? Like, how are these people even able to buy these bodies? Like, how is there a market for this in the first place?
I know exactly. Well, let's take a deep dive into it. What I just put up on the screen is the indictment, and this is the actual court document. If you're on a smartphone or a smaller device, you won't be able to see, but just to verify that this is the indictment, up at the top you see a series of blue numbers and letters. Anytime any document is filed in federal court anywhere, the federal court date stamps it, and that's the date stamp on this indictment. So On the first page of the indictment, we see number one Harvard Medical School, HMS, as we read along. Cedric Lodge resided in Goffstown, New Hampshire, and was employed by Harvard as the morgue manager. And so his wife is Denise Lodge. She was married to Mr. Cedric Lodge, and they lived in Goffstown. Katrina McLean, we'll see more about her in a little while. She lived in Salem, Mass., and she had a business called Cat's Creepy Creations. It was a studio and a store located in Peabody, Massachusetts, and Katrina McLean owned it. Then we go down to Pennsylvania, and there's a fellow by the name of Joshua Taylor. He resided in West Lawn, Pennsylvania, which is just west of and north a little bit of Philadelphia. And Jeremy Pauley, who resided in Enola, Pennsylvania, and Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. So now we get to Harvard Medical School morgue operations. Harvard utilizes human cadavers in the regular course of teaching its students. Cadavers are voluntarily donated by individuals who complete an agreement with Harvard through Anatomical Gifts Program. And when Harvard is finished using the donated cadavers, the donor's remains are typically cremated in a crematorium outside of Boston. And then they're either returned to the donor's family or laid to rest in a cemetery in Tewksbury, Massachusetts, north of Boston. The donors may have elected to specify the final disposition of their remains as part of their donation agreement. If a donor specified that their remains should be returned to the next of kin after cremation, Harvard turned the donor's cremains, I should say, for the specified family members. And it goes on and on. Harvard Medical School had an on-site morgue facility where donated cadavers were stored until they were used for education, teaching, or research purposes. Harvard Medical School documented the identities of the donated cadavers. We can skip ahead to the next page. Employees, this should go without saying. Wouldn't you think, number 14? Employees of Harvard Medical School are not permitted to remove, keep, or sell any human remains in whole or in part belonging to a donated cadaver.
Oh, I guess it had to be a rule because apparently some people wanted them.
I mean, I've actually worked in offices where there was a written policy: no removing pencils or paper clips or other, office supplies. So I guess you have to put everything in writing. Yeah. So, then we talk about, under number 2, the conspiracy and its objects. From in or about 2018, the exact date being unknown to the grand jury, and continuing thereafter until around March of 2023. In the Middle District of Pennsylvania and elsewhere, the defendants knowingly, intentionally, and willfully conspired, combined, confederated, and agreed with Jeremy Pauley and other persons, both known and unknown to the grand jury, to unlawfully transport, transmit, and transfer. Don't you love the legal language? Transport, transmit, and transfer. And cause to be transported, transmitted, and transferred in interstate commerce from Boston to New Hampshire and Pennsylvania. Stolen goods, wares, and merchandise, that is, human remains for the value of $5,000 or more, some to have been stolen or known to be stolen and converted and taken by fraud in violation of Title 18 U.S.C. Section 2314. So pay attention to the law because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the object of the conspiracy was for the conspirators to profit from the interstate shipment, purchase, and sale of stolen human remains. So again, they repeat that Cedric Lodge was the morgue manager. Now we're going to get into the heart of it. At times, Cedric Lodge stole dissected portions of donated cadavers, including, for example, heads, brains, skin, bones, and other human remains without the knowledge or permission of HMS, and removed those remains from the morgue in Massachusetts and transported them to his residence in New Hampshire. So there it is. Oh, by the way, the highlights are mine. The document was black and white with the blue date stamp, but so I went through and highlighted it. I took that liberty. And they sold this stuff through the internet, social media websites, and cell telephones. So I don't know, Lainey, I don't know about you, but I do buy a lot of stuff on the internet.
Hmm.
Usually clothes, office supplies, computer stuff. But how would they get away with, selling this stuff on the internet? Do you have any idea? You're a computer expert of sorts.
So the only way that I could fathom is through the dark web, like the underweb, where it's just like, people. I don't really know personally how to access it. I think you need like to download certain browsers and things along that nature, but there is like some sort of like illegal online community that's like somehow pretty unregulated. So I have to imagine it's through something like that, but at the same time, I think these some of these people were like publicly posting about some of the stuff that they had. So or no, they weren't publicly posting. Like my thought is like if you know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy
Oh, okay. I
or
don't know a guy that
forums.
I don't know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that sells this sort of things. it's
I don't
all I
personally either.
it's
If
all
you're
I can
into it, you might know a guy.
it's all I can do to get into the office supply store and not screw up and get my orders straight and make sure I'm not ordering 15 printers and only one printer, but that's just me. So anyhow, then the next creepy thing to me is that these folks sometimes shipped these remains through the United States Postal Service to Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So I can only assume they were using the Manchester, New Hampshire post office, and I can't tell you how many times, I've used that post office. I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes if I'm working on a Saturday and it runs to be late in the afternoon and, I just want to get it off my desk. I don't want to worry about it on Sunday. I'll run up to the Manchester post office because the window is open until 2 and the electronic thingy, you can go into the lobby of the Manchester, New Hampshire post office, pretty much 24/7, go over to the automatic thingy and get your postage and then mail it through a great big huge slot that makes a big loud noise. And I'm wondering if I was ever in there when they were shipping this kind of stuff because you see other people in there, preparing their shipments. And so it's just the
Every
first
time you
time
go in there, yeah, people have boxes.
the first time I read this, I have goosebumps again. So so anyhow, it goes on, and it starts. Legal pleadings are sometimes repetitive, but we can go down to 22 where Katrina McLean enters the picture. She sold human remains stolen in this manner to buyers in multiple states, including Jeremy Pauley in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and shipped or transported the stolen human remains to those buyers. McLean also stored and sold stolen remains at Cat's Creepy Creations, and we're going to take a look at Cat's Creepies in a little bit. Joshua Taylor bought and caused stolen human remains to be shipped to him in Pennsylvania and New Hampshire and transported stolen human remains from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania and sold and shipped stolen human remains to buyers, including Jeremy Pauley in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. Overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy and to the effect the objects of the conspiracy. The following overt acts, among others, were committed in the Middle District of Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So now we go all the way back to 2018 and 2019, some time ago, including on or about April 15th, 2019. Hey, that's tax day. Denise Lodge, instead of paying her taxes, or maybe while she was paying her taxes, communicated with individual one who resided in Montgomery, Pennsylvania, in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and agreed to sell him human remains stolen from Harvard Medical School by Cedric Lodge. Denise Lodge shipped the stolen human remains from Manchester, New Hampshire. There's that post office again. Oh, my goodness. So they shipped them from Manchester Post Office to Montgomery, Pennsylvania in a package bearing tracking number ending 342303. Look at the detail in this indictment. Is that something? So, you go to the post office and you get that little tracking number so you can go in and make sure that it got where I don't know if you do that. I do that all the time because you mail stuff to other people, lawyers, clients, whatever. They do the same to me. They track to make sure that I got this stuff. So in or about October 2020, so now we're deep into pandemic territory, Katrina McLean agreed to purchase 2 dissected faces for $600 from Cedric Lodge, and they agreed to meet at 1 p.m. on or about October 20th, 28th, 2020 at the Harvard Medical School morgue to conduct the transaction. So this is a part I really just don't understand this. It's more bizarre enough to figure that he was taking stuff out of the morgue home to New Hampshire. But according to this, he actually had people come into the morgue to check stuff out. And I don't
Oh
know.
my God.
If
It's
you
also
work,
like $300 a face is really cheap. Like, well,
I never had any,
like
I never had any idea there was a price on a face, but
maybe they weren't very good faces. I would think that most faces would be worth a couple thousand, but I don't know. I guess not. That is
so,
crazy to,
So here's
yeah.
something I don't understand. If you worked at, let's just pretend Amazon.com. If you worked in the warehouse, I would guess that Amazon.com has a lot of security that people can't just bring their friends in to start lifting iPhones and iPads and PCs. I'm just guessing because you can buy some pretty high ticket stuff from Amazon, right? So
Yeah.
so I'm thinking, I'm betting. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I'm betting that Amazon has pretty tight security at their warehouses that you can't just invite your friends in to start taking stuff. So how did this happen at the Harvard morgue where the manager of the morgue had people come in and pick out their body parts? I mean, anyhow,
I think
that's
it's because it's a school. I think, like, in general, like with colleges, because you have so many students where, like, some have badges and stuff to swipe, but it's like you gotta swipe in and nobody's gonna question who's there, I feel. Nobody's thinking, like, oh, like, gotta watch out, they're gonna take our bodies. Like, a lot of the times they probably get away with it as a educational thing. It's like, oh, we're inviting our guest over. We're inviting people to see like what happens here, prospective students, things along that nature.
well, I guess you're right. I mean, I've been on the campus of Penn State and University of New Hampshire and all these the Suffolk Law School where I went. And to some degree, I see what you're saying. Sure, you can just walk onto the campus of Southern New Hampshire University and walk around. They have a nice food area. They have a lot of nice facilities. But maybe I'm wrong. I would have guessed that going from the food area to the morgue, there might be a level of security. I bet there is now. I don't know. I bet there's security now, but
I hope.
anyhow, maybe you're right. You must be right because they got away with this for all those years.
Oh
Let's
my God.
continue. We're getting there. In or about June and July of 2021, Katrina McLean in Massachusetts shipped human skin to Jeremy Pauley in Pennsylvania and engaged his services to tan the skin to create leather. So Pauley sent a photograph of the leather, and McLean agreed to provide Pauley with human skin in lieu of monetary payment. Katrina McLean then contacted Cedric Lodge and inquired about obtaining human skin to send to, quote, the dude I sent the chest piece to tan. Okay. Okay. So, it goes on. We'll skip over to the next page, page 9. Paragraph 29, between on or about September 3rd, 2018 through July 12th, 2021, Joshua Taylor transferred 39 electronic payments to PayPal account twaim@yahoo.com, operated by Denise Lodge, totaling $37,000, $355.56. That's a lot of stuff in payment.
Especially when you're getting $300 faces.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
And other stuff, which we talked about before, and we're about ready to get into some more stuff in payment for human remains stolen by Cedric Lodge from Harvard Medical School. For example, on May 19th, 2019, Taylor sent Denise Lodge $1,000 with a memo that read, head number 7. On November 20th, 2020, Taylor sent Denise Lodge $200 with a memo that read, brains. And look how they spelled it.
Oh my God.
So, another payment of $8,800. Then Jeremy Pauley transferred 25 payments totaling $40,049.04 in the United States currency to Joshua Taylor, including $3,500 on April 1st, April Fool's Day.
Ah.
and $9,000 on January 13th, 2022, all in violation of Title 18 USC Section 371. I feel duty bound, not having mentioned it before, I feel duty bound to point out that this is an indictment. These are allegations. None of this has been proven in a court of law, and these people are entitled to a day in court, a fair trial, and a speedy trial if they elect to have that. So all of these things are alleged to have occurred. So now we get into count 2, interstate transport of stolen goods, aiding and abetting. And it's somewhat repetitive. Legal pleadings can be somewhat repetitive.
I can't get over the way you say it's like these are all alleged, and it's like they have alleged to send a text that said
Well,
brains for $200.
well, I guess the grand jury was presented with that evidence, and then the grand jury voted to indict, and so the district attorney put all of this stuff down. And again, it's alleged. Count 3 is interstate transport of stolen goods. Take note of that. Interstate transport of stolen goods. Because we're getting there. We're almost done. Then count 4, again, interstate transport of stolen goods. And what they do here is in each count of a legal complaint, what you do is you, rather than repeating back the facts, you say, well, based on those facts that we've talked about before, that fits the requirements of making a prima facie case under this statute. So that's why they, now rattle through this count 5, again, interstate transport of stolen goods, aiding and abetting against Denise Lodge. Then this is interesting. Now we get to the very end, and it's called a forfeiture allegation. And what this says is basically, if you go down under the 4 names, they shall forfeit to the United States of America any property, real or personal, which constitutes or is derived from proceeds traceable to the offense. So, in other words, if this couple in Goffstown purchased specific items, a car or a boat or a vacation home, and those monies are traceable back to the sale of the body parts, those can be taken away from them under the federal law. But then on the next page, the final allegation is that if for any reason things have been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court or have been commingled with other property, which can't be divided without difficulty, then the United States has a right to forfeiture. And what that means is that they can attach their houses. Suppose the prosecutors can't, if they get a conviction, suppose they can't trace the exact money that was made and where it went. Well, then to the extent they do get convictions, they have a right to attach their homes, their cars. I don't know if they have vacation homes or anything like that, but certainly that would be something that the prosecutors would be looking at. And the final comment about this whole thing is that you'll notice that the foreperson's name is inked out because if you're on a jury, whether it's a grand jury or a petit jury, you have a right of privacy. Not that jurors can and do go over to TV stations, newspapers, and tell their story, but they have a right to privacy. So that's the indictment. Here we are. And I guess just a final note would be that here is the store. Here's one of the dolls that Kat made. Now, we don't know what she used, how it's made, but this is one of the dolls that she made. And Kat's Creepy Creations. There it is. There's her store down in Peabody. Someone got in there and took a picture and, take a look at the stuff in there, When I go to places like that, well, not that I go to places like that, but around Halloween, you go to the Halloween store, you assume it's plastic, right? Mm-hmm. You assume all the creepy, deepy things that you see.
That nothing's real. Yeah.
But apparently, some of the things we're looking at there are real. So, I don't know. So that's the indictment. Again, it's all alleged. It's all things that a prosecutor in Pennsylvania federal court was able to convince grand jurors of. And so now, the case has started, and there will be discovery and at some point a trial, unless it's settled. So that's the indictment,
Mhm.
you know?
So I have a question. There was a lot about transporting, transit, moving, but there was nothing that specified misuse of body parts from the charges specifically. Is why would that be?
That's a really good point. And that's why, as we went through, I said, take a look at the counts and the charges. The charges don't have anything to do with mangling a human body. The charges, the actual counts against these people are for transporting stolen goods and for conspiracy. There's no real federal law against, dealing parts of a cadaver because they weren't charged with that. The counts in the complaint are for solely for transporting stolen goods over state lines and for conspiracy. So that's a really good point. And then the next point is that in Massachusetts, there's also very little law. In Massachusetts, they have nothing at all that says that this is. I'm trying to go to my next slide, and even the governor of the state, who is Maura Healey, who is a former district attorney, I should say, she's a former attorney general. Even she was quoted as saying, guess what? There's no actual law on this in Massachusetts. She went on WBUR and she said Massachusetts currently has no oversight of medical school morgues. Yes, it's something we're going to look at, obviously, but that's the governor of Massachusetts, who, like I said, was the attorney general for Massachusetts for many, many years. And so, if she's saying there's no law against this in Massachusetts, of all people, I would think that she would know. So yeah, that was a good comment that she made. That I guess there's no law when you don't think there needs to be a law. When the legislature started meeting 200 years ago, from then until now, nobody ever said, "Geez, you know what? Maybe somebody will start selling body parts out of a morgue, and we ought to have a law." So go figure.
I, I mean, to be fair, I don't really think like anybody's expecting any faces to be peeled off and sold cheaper than some purses, but that, I would be guilty of not making any laws against that either.
No, me
Now,
neither. No, no.
you mentioned the forfeiture with their assets and things that may have been purchased with the money that they got from their illegal practices. um so now that's the federal court, that's criminal. Now the families of these people finding out, like, one, I can't even imagine how difficult it is to track these bodies and whose family is who, but like the people who of the family members of the people who did donate their bodies, is there anything that they can do to get some kind of legal recourse against Harvard and everything and the people involved, as far as just getting some kind of peace with all this horrible stuff going on to their family members?
Well, yeah, exactly. So far, we've been talking about criminal law and criminal charges. Let's switch gears, take off the criminal hat, and put on the civil hat. Yes, of course. Already, this story only broke a couple of weeks before we're doing this podcast, in the middle of June of 2023. And just in those short weeks, a couple of class actions have been started where these families are, in fact, seeking legal redress and emotional distress. I mean, imagine that. It's, your loved one passes away and you figure, okay, they wanted to donate their body to science, and there's some closure there. You would hope there's some closure. Then all of a sudden you see stories about this in the headlines. And, it's just amazing that
Mhm.
this would even happen. So yeah, as of the day before we're doing this podcast, 310 families had actually signed up for these class actions, and
Okay.
they're out there, and I'm sure that more will be added as time goes on. I have a personal note to add to this. I had a family member donate their body to science, not around here, they're from another state, and it was a very close family member who got pancreatic cancer. And that family member had been a scientist, a research and development engineer all their life, and knew a lot about science, even taught. And so when this family member passed away of pancreatic cancer, which, as we all know, it's pretty much of a death sentence. It's a horrible, one of the more horrible forms of cancer. Not that any of them are any better than the others, but when he got pancreatic cancer, he says, "Look, I will donate my body to a medical research facility, not Harvard, another one in another part of the country." And so that's what happened when he passed away. There was a service, but there was no cremation, there was no burial, because everybody trusted that the medical research facility would do what they do. And, hopefully by donating his body to science, perhaps researchers would make some inroads in that horrible disease. So, on a personal note, I can kind of understand, not really, what these people are going through, but so it's just I just can't imagine what they're going through at this point, especially to see it so publicly on TV.
Mhm.
But
And
just a
to find
crazy,
out,
crazy set of
yeah.
facts.
It's kind of almost like it's incomprehensible in the sense where like, we obviously there's very morbid people, but it's just something that's so inhumane where you think that, as a society we've kind of gotten past this, especially like I can't even think about being the kind of person to ever want to buy these things, let alone be the person like selling it and then have such lack of empathy to be texting like brains and silly stuff. But I guess now on that note, like what defense did these people even have for themselves that to justify their actions in this situation now that it's in the public eye?
Well, again, as I said before, these are only allegations, and they have every right to a free, fair trial, a speedy trial, I should say, speedy, fair trial. And a defense attorney will come in and they will file motions in limine. That's the first thing that an attorney would do and say, hey, they are charged with transporting stolen goods, and they're charged with conspiracy. So I would imagine that they will file motions in limine to strip away the more grotesque elements of this. A motion in limine is a motion that criminal defense attorneys will file with the judge, and the jury doesn't see the motion in limine. The goal of a motion in limine is to have the judge take a look at certain evidence that may be so prejudicial that it removes the defendant's ability to have a full, fair, free trial. So if the prejudicial effect of the evidence far outweighs the relevancy of the evidence, they can strip that away. I'm not saying that that'll be successful. I'm saying that that is one technique that the criminal defense attorneys will have.
Mhm.
Other things that the defense attorneys will do is, simply to take a really close look at what the elements are of receiving stolen goods, transporting stolen goods, and they'll file additional motions to whittle everything down. They'll take a look at what the elements are of conspiracy,
Mhm.
and they'll seek to knock each element out. And if they can knock any element out, they will have a good day in the defense. So it's kind of jumping ahead of things, but it's a good question, and it remains to be seen. And I'm guessing that we will learn more about this as time goes on.
Mhm. And it's funny you mention the prejudicial and like getting these things dismissed, like we talked about with our like court photos. episode. So it's interesting seeing this come back to a um aspect with like now in criminal law seeing this applied. So I guess all that being said, it's just really interesting to me that the this goes back all the way, like you mentioned before, like 2018. That is like it's been 5 years. This is that we've been going around and we've talked about, like college courses, like college classes and campuses and being able to freely enter. But like, how do you get away with taking these bodies for 5 years? Like, how do you, like, I can't even imagine getting them out of the school.
No, I can't either. I mean, that's just that they got away with this for so long. I mean, I think people, even the people that steal pencils and paper clips and tablets of paper, I think even they get caught. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to understand. I mean, you drive back and forth on Interstate 93 or 95 or 495 or wherever, and you don't know what the other people in the other cars are doing and what they're transporting, but someone somehow, I mean, we attorneys all, well, most of us anyhow, carry briefcases, and I've noticed more and more in
Mm.
recent years attorneys are carrying backpacks or briefcases that strap over your shoulders, so it makes it easier to carry all your junk. But I mean, I don't know how you get in and out of a place. I mean, just the other day, my intern and I went over to the district court in our town. And before we went into the district court, I advised her that, you know what? It's going to be like going into an airport. So, you don't want to take stuff. And she left her purse back in the office. And I told her that usually what I do is when I have a briefcase, I leave it in the car. I was in court this week, actually, and I left my briefcase in the car. All I do is I take my file and a
Mm-hmm.
piece of paper, I mean, a tablet of paper to write on and scribble on, because you go through metal detectors and your briefcase goes through other detectors. So like you said before, I mean, sure, you go into a college campus and it's not like that, but I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
I would think of more. I'm thinking of the, what was that Christina Ricci movie where she was dead and she was in a morgue?
I'm
I
not
just can't
familiar.
imagine going in and out of a place like that, carrying stuff without raising some red flags. If not going through the detector like they have at the airport and the courthouse,
Hmm.
wouldn't it just raise some questions in people's minds? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point too, is when you're dealing like especially with body parts, and I guess that might be, I mean, not that it would happen, but I think there might it because this isn't the first time that there have been situations like this with morgues. Like I remember hearing in the past about morgues where they find these places and they're just like filled up with like bodies piling on top of each other because they can't keep up, and things along that nature. So it would be interesting to see if there becomes another element of, monitoring and making sure that nothing's happening with people after they're no longer on this earth, because it's almost like, you pass away and then, all right, your rights are stripped, like you're not a human anymore. Whatever can happen to your body happens with your body. And like how you mentioned with like the metal detectors and all the machinery it that you go through at the airport or even going to court, I'm pretty intrigued by the fact that these people were able to get away with mailing these body parts because you see the signs at the airport, you see the signs at the post office. There's certain things they allow you to mail, there's certain things that they can allow you to mail. Even when I was in like Puerto Rico, my cousin's husband had like a bacon sandwich in his bag, and they identified that he had pork and he wasn't supposed to bring pork on the plane, and they took his sandwich and he couldn't eat his sandwich. So it's
Oh,
like how like they
good
could
grief.
get pork but they can't get this head that's being shipped. The faces
That's
going on for $300. What a
Yeah, I know. You go to
steal.
the post office and you stand in line, and there's a great big sign. Some things were never meant to be mailed. Gasoline, fireworks, and there's a whole list of things that it's common sense. It's common sense. Who would think to mail, a canister of gasoline like you put in your lawnmower through the mail? Yeah, it's not funny, but I mean, they have to actually put that in writing and put it up on the wall of the post office, the Manchester post office, that you're not allowed to mail stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A final point that came to my mind when I saw that the governor of Massachusetts said there's no law in Massachusetts, and when others said there's no federal law, I'm scratching my head, and I'm remembering a case that came up a few years ago in a crematorium in New Hampshire, which is a whole different ball of wax. It's totally different and distinguished and different, as attorneys will tell you. But forgive me if I read off of my notes, but I think it's an important point. So I'll make it by reading off of my. There was a crematorium in Seabrook, New Hampshire, that was shut down after the authorities executing a warrant for financial records, and it was only a financial thing, went in and they found decomposing bodies in a broken refrigeration unit. They found, in addition to that, they found 2 bodies in the same oven and ashes without identification. This crematory in New Hampshire had never registered with the state as required by law and was never inspected by the state. Hunt's complaint, that's the person that filed the complaint, alleges that this crematory in coastal New Hampshire commingled bodies while they were cremated, failed to keep accurate records of the bodies, and either failed to return remains to families or returned them in urns mixed with the ashes for other bodies. So in other words, someone would pass away, the family would send the ashes to the crematorium, and they would what they would get back wasn't necessarily their loved one's ashes. It could have been someone else's, or they were mixed together. And so this is what came to my mind. And the law is sometimes a little bit crazy, but in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, those are the only 2 states that I'm licensed in, but I would imagine elsewhere too, there are laws that apply to crematoria and also to funeral homes, that when you send your loved one to the funeral home and make the final arrangements or make arrangements to have them cremated, yeah, there are laws for that. But those laws don't apply to the medical school morgue. It's a totally different kettle of fish. It's a totally different thing. So that's what came to my mind. And I'm saying, how come there's a law? And in that case, the New Hampshire crematoria abuse, which is the only word that comes to mind, they actually went down the chain and they started going after funeral homes all over the place. There was one down on the South Shore, south of Boston, that they brought charges against them because they knew or should have known when they were, transporting, human remains to this place up in New Hampshire. They had a duty to assure that the proper thing was being done for, I don't know what other word to use, their customers. Families that entrusted them had a right to know that these other funeral homes, even in the South Shore of Boston, were keeping track of what was happening, even if they shipped the human remains up to New Hampshire. So that was very heavily regulated, and that was very heavily publicized right around just before the time that this whole thing at this morgue happened. So that came to my mind, that as we would discuss this, I knew that people would say, how can you say there's no law? Well, I'm not saying it. The governor of Massachusetts said it. And it's a different kettle of fish. I mean, what applies to crematoria and to funeral homes just apparently didn't apply here.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That is disturbing. But
yeah.
it's hard because it makes sense that if you're a business, that it's your responsibility to be checking and making sure that these bodies, that you're sending them to a facility that has the proper licensure and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's also scary to think it's just even with donating their bodies to Harvard, it's just you think that you can trust the business. Obviously
Yeah.
they should have done their due diligence, but that was pretty brutal.
One of the comments that's been made is that there are so many programs like this, like anatomical gift programs, like Harvard, Tufts, UMass, the one in the other state that I mentioned, and it might the impact of this occurrence and the legal battles that will follow, inevitably, the impact, sadly, might discourage people from taking part in those programs. And that's sad because, if you need surgery, you'd like to think that your surgery is not the surgeon's first one.
Mhm.
And like it or not, working with cadavers is part of medical school, and part of the training that physicians and people in the medical arts, take part in. And so if this story discourages people from donating, that's a sad day, because, you want, and I'm sure the medical facilities will do what they can to, I don't know if they're not going to be able to suppress this story, but to minimize it and distinguish it and say, well, it didn't happen here. And if it did happen here, we've taken, every single step, like checking all the briefcases before they go out or whatever. I don't know. But so that is sad if it has that type of effect. But so that's our deep dive into that story. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I do just want to quickly add that there's another element of it too, where I imagine that the people going to these medical schools also might be people who don't feel like they can afford going to a regular doctor, or they think that they're doing good by going to the school. So it's a little bit sad to see that this might also like affect more lower income places that maybe were getting services at these schools. But that's just another thought to have. But I do want to say to the audience, thank you guys so much for spending another episode of About the Law with us today. Although it's a gruesome topic, thank you guys for watching to the end. We really appreciate it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video with your friends if you enjoyed this video or found it interesting. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one.
Yep, thank you, Lainey. And again, if you have any ideas for future episodes of About the Law, please go down into the comments below and let us know your thoughts. Thank you, Lainey, for reminding people, please, to like, subscribe, and share, and we will continue to bring you what we believe is the best content that's possible.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, and Derry, New Hampshire. Please give us a like and subscribe. The foregoing is offered for informational purpose only. It is not intended as, nor does it constitute, legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney who is thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies.